Well, it's great to be back in the villages. I know we brought the air conditioning out here, so thank you guys for being with us. We're unveiling this. You know, normally you do remarks and then you guys sit down. But I think it's better to just show it so that I'm not speaking in front of a box. If you guys want to go, maybe just pull it off, and then we'll see. We'll let everyone know why we're here. All right. So we're happy to be here. That's Secretary of State Cord Bird and Visit Florida President CEO Brian Griffin. We also have Reps Chamberlain and Yakovsky, State Attorney Bill Gladson, Sumter County Sheriff Pat Breeden, Sumter State College President John Temple, Villages CEO Robert Chandler. I want to thank everybody for doing that. We're here to help bring in America 250. This is a long-running thing we've been doing. I think Cord and I started talking about this in 2024, about what Florida would do to be able to honor this really historic occasion. And one of the things that we said we were going to do was all the counties that are named after founding fathers, we were going to commission statues in their honor. And so you got Franklin, Ben Franklin in Franklin County, Hamilton in Hamilton County, Madison in Madison County. When blue states take these statues down, the market value goes down. I get them at a discount. I'm not statues. But we really believe in honoring the history, the founders, and really an important thing. And I know that there's been a movement recently to kind of tear down those remembrances and to denigrate the founding of this country. We reject that entirely here in the free state of Florida. We understand that this was an important moment, not just in the history of the United States, obviously, but in all of human history. And certainly, if you go back the last 1,000, 1,500 years, I don't know that there was a single moment that was more important to human freedom than that announcement of independence and the eventual signing of the Declaration of Independence. But throughout that, and we want to do that, and that's the main focus, but what we've also done is recognize people that exemplified the founding principles of this country and also honored them. And part of the reason we did that was because, go fast forward, 1776 they do the Declaration, 1787 they do the Constitution. Ben Franklin's walking out of that convention and he's asked, did you give us a republic or a monarchy? And his answer was, a republic if you can keep it. So they didn't think that they answered these questions for all time. They thought that they were giving the American people just a ticket to the dance to determine whether people could govern themselves. But ultimately, you'd have to have every generation of Americans step up and be counted and defend freedom. And so we've honored people who have done that throughout our history. We did a statue in St. Augustine for Frederick Douglass. He did a big speech there in 1889. And that was something that was very meaningful. We commissioned a statue of President Reagan at Florida International University. The president's house was named after him many years ago, and he obviously was down in South Florida fighting communism in the 1980s, and that's a great statue. We've also done, I did Calvin Coolidge at the Bach Tower Gardens. Amazing statue, a very successful, underrated president, and he was there in Central Florida to commission the Bach Tower back in 1929. It was the final trip he took as president before he turned over the reins. So we've done all these, and we're going to continue to do more. And obviously, President Lincoln is part of that. But I don't want people to think that somehow we're just doing this because it's kind of in vogue for America 250. From the day I took office, we've placed an emphasis on civics education. Because you can have people that go on to be welders or business people or doctors or all this other stuff. Every single person we graduate out of our K-12 system is going to be called upon to exercise the duties of being an American citizen. And we're not doing our job if we're just graduating a bunch of blank slates who don't have the understanding of what it means to be an American. They need that foundation to be able to be good citizens. So we not only boosted civics education in terms of the standards and the amount of civics that you need in our school system, but we created speech and debate program, which was not really very big in Florida. Now every school district has speech and debate. We just hosted the state championship in April at New College in Sarasota. The winner got a $50,000 scholarship, which in Florida, we have the lowest in-state tuition in the country. So $6,300 is the same as when I took office. We haven't let them raise it one penny, even in spite of all the inflation. We've held the line on that. So $50,000, that pays for more than 4 years of tuition, not even close. And then we gave prizes to the others, and there was an America 250. I was just, the other day, I was in, it was Tampa, somewhere, and one of the little girls came and said she won the America 250 essay contest that we did. And she got a scholarship, and she's in like 5th grade or 4th, so these are really important. But one thing we noticed was, I can sit there and say, this is the standard, you gotta learn this, you gotta learn that, you gotta learn all these great things. That's fine, but you need teachers that really understand this and are passionate about it. And the reality is, apart from Florida, most universities in this country are not emphasizing the Western canon and the Western tradition. They typically view the Founding Fathers negatively, as well as the intellectual influences that led to the formation of the United States of America. Part of it's a political agenda. Some of it is they say, oh, well, why would we listen to some philosopher who was like a white male? And it's just kind of the DEI mindset of what. But the thing is the reason why the U.S. has succeeded is because it was built on a pillar of truth and justice and liberty that really is enduring, and it's important. And so we looked at that and said, okay, we got to have teachers that really get this, and it's not necessarily even their fault if they go to shoehorn you and they're told, that the Founding Fathers are bad. That's just the nature of it. So we're going to create this Civic Seal of Excellence program. Our K-12 teachers can go through that program. It's a 50-hour course. We got some of the best scholars in the country to lecture on all these different building blocks. You go back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome. You go back to the Enlightenment. You go back to the Christian tradition. You go to British common law. All these different things that led to this is very important to understand. So they go through that program. They get a $3,000 bonus for going through the program. We've had 21,000 teachers participate in this, and it's purely optional. You don't have to do it. And we've paid out over $60 million in bonuses, and the budget I just signed has more of that. We're going to continue that going forward. And the speech and debate initiative that I mentioned originally, we believe not only is it good to understand civic knowledge, it's also good to learn how to think for yourself, how to make arguments. Part of the reason when you have academia that's gone in some of these Ivy League schools, for example, very much imposing an agenda, first of all, I disagree with that agenda, but it also isn't doing the students any favors, because if all you have to do is parrot talking points and repeat the narrative without ever having your assumptions questioned, you are not going to be as sharp a thinker as you need to be. So getting in that speech and debate, you may be given, maybe you hate the Second Amendment, then you have to argue in favor of the Second. You got to look inside and question your assumptions. You got to see things from another perspective. So fostering critical thinking skills, I think, is absolutely important, and it's very, very significant in terms of what we're doing. We've done a lot on education. Civics is one part of it. But honestly, I think if you do well in civics, I think it bleeds over to success in some of these other areas of education. We're number one in public higher education for, I think, every year that I've been governor, we've been rated number one for public higher education. We have some of the top rated public universities. We're number one for education freedom. We have been ranked number one for civics education. We had the highest graduation rate in state history in the most recent figures. I just announced our progress monitoring results. Highest proficiency ever recorded in Florida for English language arts and mathematics, which is something that's really, really good. And on it goes. So it's all very important. And I mentioned I just signed the budget yesterday. Florida, so first of all, we have record funding for teacher pay, record funding for school districts, record school choice scholarships, all these things, which are really good. Record money for infrastructure. You know, we're accelerating that project on 75 in Ocala. Really bad traffic there. That wasn't even supposed to start until next decade. We plowed billions and billions of dollars into accelerating these key choke points around Florida, and so those are now underway, and they're going to be delivered maybe a decade ahead of schedule, which is good. But that requires money, and we've put a lot of money. Just the I-4, you go from Tampa to Orlando to Disney, just the I-4 temporary lane has been a big deal, and then that's going to be permanent. So we're doing all that. We've done the largest environmental restoration in the history of the United States of America with our Everglades restoration project. Massive amounts of money that have gone into that, massive success that's gone into that. So we've done big things in terms of using the budget to advance core interests. But even though we did, all those are records in Florida, not even close. The budget I signed yesterday represents the 4th straight year where we've reduced our budget in Florida. How many do we have any transplanted New Yorkers in the crowd? I see some hands. Honestly, not as many as I thought I would see. So New York State, and I bring them up partially because we have a lot of refugees from there, partially because we're the 3rd most populous state, they're the 4th most populous state. They used to be the most populous state. I mean, someone was in 1960 in that election, Florida had 6 electoral votes, New York had like 46. Now we have 3 to 4 million more residents than New York State does, and yet, even though we have 3 to 4 more million residents, the budget I signed, lowest in 4 years, $117 billion, give or take. New York's budget, with 3 or 4 million fewer people, $268 billion in their budget. And it's like, what is that money going towards? People are sure getting taxed. They're getting taxed a lot, but it just doesn't work. So we are less than half of what they've done. We've had 4 straight years of reducing the budget, and that's not even just saying adjusted for inflation. Yes, if you adjust for inflation and population, it's even more dramatic. Even knowing we've had inflation and population growth, the budget nominally has still gone down. That is not easy to do when you have more people and you have inflation, and yet that's what's happened in the state of Florida. We had a state debt. Now, not that we had like an outrageous state debt compared to Illinois or New York or some of these ones, but we had an opportunity to whack that. So the budget I signed with the accelerated debt repayment program I instituted will have all of Florida's history. Just in my tenure as governor, when the next fiscal year ends, we will have paid off over 52% of the state's total debt in just 8 years. And we now have lowest debt per capita of any state in the United States. We also have this. So we have the lowest number of state government bureaucrats per capita in the entire United States of America. In fact, if you look at the size of the government, when I took office in 2019, today that government is smaller than it was in 2019, and that's when we've had population growth and inflation. The footprint has shrank in the state of Florida, and we're always told, like, these government, Ronald Reagan said the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government bureau, and there was a lot of truth to that, but I think we're showing that, no, government doesn't have to grow inexorably, that we can actually reduce, and that's what we've done. So, and then our rainy day fund. We had the rainy day fund when I came in to now. We've more than tripled the rainy day fund. In fact, we've maxed it out. We're not allowed under Florida's Constitution to put any more money in the rainy day fund. And look, I hope things continue going well, in future years, particularly, in terms of the national economy. You could have a big market correction. You could have a downturn. Guess what? In Florida, if we need money, you take from the surplus and you plug the hole. You take here and plug this hole. You don't raise tax, you don't do any of that. It's plug and play, it's ready to go. And that's really what our responsibility is, to make sure that we're leaving this better than we found it. And there's no question, if you look at all this, Florida's economy is better than it was 7.5 years ago. Florida's fiscal posture is better than it was. Florida's debt per capita is better and less debt, less taxes today than 7.5 years ago, and hopefully they'll do something on property tax in November to give people more break. So these are all really, really good things, and but it just shows it can be done. You know, we're always told, oh, you just can't. You can never solve these problems. You can never do it. We're showing it can be done, and so if we're able to reduce our budget 4 straight years, even in the face of inflation and population growth, what's the excuse for these other places? Why can't they get this under control? And I think the reason is these are choices that are being made. People are choosing to waste money. People are choosing to do some of these things. It's not that they're incapable of changing course, they just don't want to change course. And part of it is because government itself has become an interest group in many parts of the country. You're even seeing that with local governments here in Florida. You know, they want to put in money to be able to run advertisements to tell you they need more of your money. I mean, like, you know, really, if they have money to do that, then they're overtaxing you. But that's just the nature of it, and I think at the state level in Florida, we've really steered clear of that. So all that is really, really good. So that brings us here today to, you know, why are we doing President Lincoln? And, you know, it's interesting because we do we have any Illinois transplants here in the crowd? We have a few, okay. We got a lot of them in Southwest Florida. Where we were versus, you know, most of these other people, they had a direct connection to Florida, whether it's President Reagan in South Florida, Coolidge at Bach Tower, Frederick Douglass. I think we're going to do an Andrew Jackson soon. We're going to do Ponce de Leon. We're going to do a bunch of ones, and we're just going to do it throughout the rest of the year. So it'll be good. But you know, Lincoln really not as much direct, but we felt that it was important because of kind of what he stood for. And first, this is a guy of very humble beginnings. I mean, he was born on the outskirts of society in many ways in Kentucky. Of course, grew up in his formative years in Illinois, was not somebody that was born to great wealth or privilege, and he was just somebody that was very smart and worked very hard. He applied the craft of law. See, he did not go to law school. He studied for the bar, he took it, and then he got a practice. I think we should allow that in Florida. You should be able to read for the bar, take it, and not have to pay for law school. You know, the bar hates that because they want it to be a guild, but I think Lincoln, his example is very instructive. I mean, he was largely self-taught, which is really remarkable. And so then he gets into politics, and if you only had his career up until 1859, you'd be like, this guy's one of the biggest political failures ever. It was like one failure after another and all these different things. He ran for the Senate in 1858 against Stephen Douglas. Now back then, the legislatures voted for the senator, so it was somewhat cosmetic, but they were going around barnstorming, doing these great debates, and he wasn't successful in that. And then, of course, he got elected president very narrowly, very, very small plurality, and really was lucky to get reelected in many respects. That was a very difficult election in 1864. But be that as it may, he's really an example of being able to persevere and overcome a lot of obstacles that are put in your way. And I think if people would see him like, oh man, you're trying this, you failed last time, you failed this time, all this, a lot of people would have told him to pack it in. And instead, he believed in these key ideas, and so he plowed forward. So he's debating Douglas, and the main issue that they were debating was the Supreme Court's ruling of the Dred Scott decision. And the Dred Scott decision was handed down in 1857. It's viewed today, and at the time even, as a terrible decision, but now one of the worst decisions the Supreme Court has ever rendered. Douglas was in favor of Dred Scott. Abraham Lincoln opposed Dred Scott, and part of it was about what was the role of the expansion of slavery in the territories. Lincoln and the Republican Party, you know, the whole purpose of the party was you cannot allow slavery to extend into the territories. Democrats wanted slavery in the territories. They said popular sovereignty, just let people vote on it. And so that was a huge dividing line in this 1858 debate. But what Lincoln was raising the question of, that I think is very pertinent to today, where we see some of the judicial decisions that come out, and particularly of some of these district courts, as just being way outside what the law or Constitution says, is, what is the proper role of the courts in a representative constitutional democracy? And I think what people in kind of the more modern age have come to is this idea of judicial supremacism, that, you don't worry about the Constitution. It just matters. The only thing that matters, those 9 lawyers on the Supreme Court, they determine the Constitution, meaning, and the rest of you should just be quiet and sit on the sidelines. That is not what Lincoln believed. So Dred Scott came down, and Lincoln said, look, Dred Scott lost his case. I disagree with that ruling, but we have to respect that decision as it relates to Dred Scott. He lost. He can appeal. He can't appeal anymore before the Supreme Court, but when you lose a case, you can appeal, and you do that. That's kind of the way the legal system works. But he says we cannot allow one decision on one set of facts to fix the policy of the entire United States of America. So he rejected the idea that Dred Scott had settled the question once and for all. And I think that that's very, very important, because what he was saying is, he, as someone running for Senate at the time, later as president, he had a duty to interpret the Constitution. You take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. If you think it's unconstitutional to have this in the territories, then you need to govern yourself accordingly. And he cited in these debates Andrew Jackson. When Jackson was president, Jackson vetoed the Bank of the United States bill, the Second Bank of the United States bill. That had been litigated decades before, and the court had said that it was consistent with the necessary and proper clauses of the Constitution and Congress's enumerated powers. Anyways, it's just kind of a constitutional debate. It lands on Jackson's desk, and he says, you know what? I've read the Constitution. I've looked through this. I don't see how this bank is constitutional. And if I don't believe the bank is constitutional, I not only have the right, I have the responsibility to exercise the veto power to be able to stop unconstitutional legislation from taking effect. And so Lincoln and Jackson, and honestly many of the founders, rejected the idea that somehow the court existed above the entire constitutional system. The court is a part of the constitutional system, but it doesn't speak ex cathedra about the Constitution, and we obviously in other branches have a responsibility to interpret and pursue the Constitution as we see fit. So the case of Dred Scott, Lincoln said, fine, I disagree, but we'll abide by it. But as president, he's like, I'm not going to let that fix the entire policy of the country. He said, if you do that, then we cease to become our own rulers. So there's a lot of wisdom in what he was saying back in 1858 and his inauguration address in 1861 about how is power apportioned in a constitution and who ultimately governs. Is it us governing ourselves, but ultimately the court has veto power over a lot of these key questions, or are private cases decided, respected, but then the other branches have the responsibility to pursue a constitutional course of action? And so that's very, very important. The other thing I think he did that is pertinent today's time is he relied on the Declaration of Independence for what he was doing. He hearkened back and said, and this kind of goes to a debate we're having now. So the modern left, they denigrate the founders and they denigrate the founding of the country because they say, oh, these are just a bunch of slave owners. In fact, the New York Times commissioned a project a few years ago, the 1619 Project. And the goal of that was basically to assert things like, oh, the American Revolution was fought because of slavery. And, this is a revolution that was birthed in Massachusetts. They didn't have a lot of slavery, if any, then at the time. You can read why the people were rebelling. They never mention that at all. And so it's a way to try to distort history to delegitimize the founders, and more importantly, to delegitimize their ideas, so that can be weaponized now in the future to pursue an agenda which, quite frankly, is a lot different from what the founding fathers envisioned. So Lincoln and Douglas had this debate basically about what was the true nature of the founding. And Lincoln said, look, the founding fathers wrote that all men are created equal. They said what they wrote what they meant, and they meant what they wrote. And they realized that wasn't going to be realized right at the time. But they didn't create slavery. That had been something that had been in human history for all of recorded human history, and it had been in the colonies for over 150 years prior to the announcement of the Declaration of Independence. So Lincoln's point is, look, they were dealing with that reality. They structured the Constitution in a way that they believed would lead to the extinguishment of slavery over the years. So, for example, they stopped the slave trade coming in, I think after like 15 years, and they did all these other things. And so that's why he thought Dred Scott was such a problem, because he thought that was going against the founders' vision that, okay, this is an evil we have. We don't have the political capacity to have a union and necessarily deal with it, but we can put it on a path to extinction. And he saw the alternate forces prevailing, and that was one of the reasons why he got involved. Douglas was basically saying, oh, no, you know, the founders, this is what they wanted, all this other stuff. That is actually more in line with what the modern left says, what Douglas was arguing. So Lincoln's view is that the principles are universal. Founders envisioned that these would be applied through the years, and that the founders envisioned, you know, that ultimately, you know, slavery was on its last legs. Now, it didn't turn out that way because of Dred Scott and some of these other political decisions that were made in the ensuing years, and of course, was one of the main reasons that there was a Civil War. But that was really what Lincoln believed. I mean, he believed it was a revolution based on natural rights, that the founders meant this, and that here we are. And the Dred Scott decision supporters are really rejecting the founding creed of the country. So if you want to know whether the founders are worth studying, Lincoln would say, absolutely, that's the first place you need to go. A lot of the people on the modern left, they would side with Stephen Douglas in those 1858 debates. So it's just an interesting way that this comes. So I think it's important to be able to show how he was doing. And then obviously, just having been president during probably the most difficult time that the country had. You know, you had the Civil War, then you had the question of, okay, as the Union took the upper hand on that, you know, how do you deal with the issue of slavery? And eventually Lincoln pursued and eventually was successful in teeing up the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which abolished slavery nationwide. And then, of course, they did the 14th and 15th Amendments, which, you know, basically the point was to make sure that everyone was treated equally as a citizen. And there were a whole bunch of things that happened there. So he was very important to that, and I think you can learn a lot from him. Now, speaking of the 14th Amendment, I just got word the Supreme Court has upheld birthright citizenship for illegal aliens, rejecting the limits proposed by Trump. Look, I haven't had an opportunity to read that opinion. I don't know whether they have at least given Congress an ability to legislate something differently. But when they did the 14th Amendment, what they were trying to do was overturn the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott said that the Supreme Court, Dred Scott said Dred Scott wasn't a citizen because he was black, he couldn't sue, and Lincoln rejected that. And so what they wanted to say is, wait a minute, no, you're a citizen, you know, regardless of race, and we're going to correct that injustice. That was the purpose of it. It was not to have people show up from China for 2 weeks, have babies, get them citizenship, and then go back to China. I mean, how ridiculous has this become? And it wasn't, even though they didn't really conceive of illegal immigration at the time, because transportation was more difficult, it wasn't as easy to come to a country illegally, you know, as it has historically been to the United States, particularly when Biden was in. But they never would have thought that somehow people coming in against the wishes of the people who are responsible for electing people and writing the laws, that you come in against the law, have a kid, and somehow that's an American citizen as well. So I think in terms of the original understanding, they never conceived that it would end up being this way. Now, I was predicting this was going to come out this way, unfortunately, because I just remember, when I was in law school, they drum it into you. Oh, it's already been decided. Anyone that steps foot, you do that, it's automatic. That's the original understanding. And a lot of people, I just assumed that was correct. Then when you actually read and you study the debates and you understand what they were trying to do, I don't think that's how it was originally understood. So the question's going to be, did they say as a matter of constitution that you could never limit birthright citizenship, even statutorily? Because if they said that, then it's not just the fact about Trump doing it through executive order. Then it's basically saying we can vote overwhelmingly to say no birth tourism. You have to be lawfully present here, otherwise it doesn't apply. And basically, they're going to tell you out of luck. Now, it may be that they ruled that Congress could enact those changes, but you just can't do it through executive order, which effectively was what the president did. He issued an executive order. He said, we don't recognize citizenship in these cases, particularly the birth tourists and people that have come to the country illegally. And maybe that's not the case. So we'll have to look to see that. It's not surprising that was the case, that the decision came out that way. You could just tell from kind of the oral arguments. I would imagine, was it 7-2? Did you guys see? What was 6-3? Alito, Thomas, and who else in the dissent? See, these things, like, Alito and Thomas are on the right side. You don't even have to know the thing. You just know, no matter what happens, they're going to be on the right side of it. Sorry, this is real-time news, guys. We're doing the best we can. No, I knew that you would do that.
Right.
The case will have a syllabus where they'll list it out on the front page, or one of the first pages, who's doing it. Anyways, 6-3. Okay, all right. So we'll have to see. Look, if they said that there's nothing you can do short of constitutional amendment to limit, then that's going to be a really devastating decision. If they said, can't do it through executive order, but you can do it through Congress, I'm not saying this Congress that hasn't done much is going to necessarily come on and do it, but at least you have an avenue where you can run on this. And I think it's really, really important. The thing about, I look around the country, and we've had people, and you see it in some of these election results, some of the people that have been brought in over the last 20, 30 years, they don't like the country. They want to import where they came from, which, some of these countries are really messed up, and ultimately expect us to change to go in that direction. And I just think that, first of all, that's not the way I would want to live. But second of all, how ridiculous. Imagine if some of us showed up in France and we just showed, oh yeah, you got to start doing, they would laugh at you, right? That's just not the way it is. So this birthright is an issue in terms of people can come, you kind of have, if you have kids, and it's hard for them to remove you at that point. And that's definitely been gained, there's no question. But it's a larger issue about not just illegal immigration, but who is legally being led into the country? And are these folks people that are rejecting, kind of the American way of life? And I think, unfortunately, we've seen that in larger numbers over the years. In any event, we will look at that decision, and we may have some more comments on it as we go forward. So I think it's appropriate to have it here in the Villages, because I know there's a lot of patriotism. I know people really appreciate not just the Founding Fathers, but also people that have exemplified what the Founding Fathers stood for. I think Honest Abe is one of those. He was the first ever Republican president. What better place to signify that than the Villages? And he was, at the beginning of the second term, obviously tragically assassinated, and it cut short his life, but it hasn't cut short his legacy. His legacy is enduring. He's rated as one of the top presidents in American history. Some people rate him as number one. I rate Washington as number one because I just think he was indispensable to the formation of the country. But nevertheless, he's in a very, very rare echelon in American history. And now we'll always have this here to be able to pay proper respects. Okay, Ford Bird and then Brian Griffin.
faces in the crowd. It's always great to be back in the villages. And the governor's correct. Abraham Lincoln deserves his place in the pantheon of American presidents. And it is well known that he wrote many of his own speeches, many of which today are regarded as masterpieces of poetic and artistic expression. He was an eloquent public speaker who had the capacity to raise the emotions of the audience. And when he became president, the fight against slavery was already an old issue, and the Civil War was a culmination of decades of conflict. He knew it was time to renew and regenerate old values. Lincoln strategically applied himself to this task. He resurrected the Declaration of Independence, dusted off the Constitution, and brought back a sense of pride and patriotism that had not been seen since the days of the American Revolution. Lincoln revitalized the old values of Americanism and reminded all citizens why the United States was formed in the first place. And he often turned to biblical scripture, and to do this, he called the Constitution the Declaration of Independence the golden apple. The why do we do this? And then it was in a frame of silver, which is the Constitution, which is how the Republic is to govern itself. And on November 19, 1863, after listening to the principal order of the day, Edward Everett, speak for nearly 2 hours, and I promise I won't go on that long, Abraham Lincoln spent only 2 minutes delivering the now famous Gettysburg Address, reminding the nation what the Civil War in America is all about. And that's what we're doing in Florida, and with the governor's leadership and initiative. It was last July 3rd that we put up a statue in Jefferson County of Thomas Jefferson, and we've been doing this the entire year, really making it a celebration. And it's incumbent upon all of us. And as Ronald Reagan said, freedom isn't passed in the bloodstream. So it's incumbent upon all of us here, the adults who've been blessed to grow up in a free and prosperous nation, to leave that to our posterity, to teach our children what this nation is about. And that's what this America 250 celebration is all about. It's why Florida is doing it. And this isn't hyperbole. We're doing it bigger, longer, better, more than any other state. And I'll be on 4th of July. I'll be Florida's ambassador up in Washington, D.C. At the Great American Fair. Brian Griffin's going to come up in a minute. He's already been there, but if you've seen on TV, the Florida Pavilion is the best in D.C. And it's just been a real honor to travel the state, to be able to unveil these statues, and to remind us, as all Americans, how privileged and blessed we are to live in the greatest and freest country of the world. So thank you. Honored to be here.
Good afternoon, villages. I'm Brian Griffin, President and CEO of Visit Florida, which is Florida's tourism agency. And we've been a main partner with the state of Florida in helping to execute these 250 celebrations, and we're very proud to do it. Florida is, as the governor and Secretary Byrd have said, leaning all in, going all in to make a big celebration for 250 and to invite people, residents and visitors alike, to celebrate 250 in America. Part of that has been the statue series, which I'm so proud to see off the ground. As the governor said, while other places around the country were tearing statues down, Florida reversed and stopped the trend. We are putting statues up of our founding fathers and great American presidents, and in doing so, we are righting a wrong. Visit Florida has also put out a docu-series that highlights 7 destinations around the state where you can go and see landmarks and history. We highlight the stories of Miami, Tallahassee and Port St. Joe together, Tampa, the Keys and the Everglades, Cape Canaveral, Pensacola, and St. Augustine. Those were made specifically to celebrate 250 and to talk about Florida's role in contributing to our great republic. If you want to see those, go to America250fl.com. And as Secretary Byrd said, we also have put together a pavilion at the Great American State Fair in D.C. I was just there. It's about this temperature actually up there. It's pretty warm. But the Florida Pavilion has been very popular. In fact, we've had a line every day we've been open. We went all out to make sure that visitors had a great experience. And if you're in the D.C. area, or going to be in the D.C. area for D.C., definitely hit up the Florida Pavilion. It's an honor to be here to celebrate President Lincoln, the president who preserved the Union, who championed the 13th Amendment and pushed us closer to our ideals, who bound the nation's wounds, and of course, the quintessential self-made man, a man who demonstrated the American dream. And so it really is a fitting part of the statue series, fitting to be here in Florida, and this is for people to remember those virtues. All these statues are a way for people to remember what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. virtues that helped form and shape this country. And now this statue and those others around the state will be here for a long time to come to share that story with future generations. You know, there is actually some Lincoln, Florida history that you can visit if you go all the way down to the end of the Keys and hop on a boat and go to the Dry Tortugas out to Fort Jefferson. You can see where we held one of the conspirators in the assassination plot, Dr. Mudd, who was the man who set John Wilkes Booth's leg after he broke it jumping from the balcony. His cell is still there and you can tour around it. It's a really interesting stop. It tells history there, and that is part of the driving tour that we've put out for people to see different parts of American history in Florida. Again, America250fl.com is where you can find that driving tour. These celebrations, I know we're coming up on the 4th and we're going to do it big, but these are going to continue all year. Visit Florida is certainly going to continue to put out opportunities for people to experience history around the state. So if you haven't made plans to come to Florida already and be here for 250, do so. You've got all year long. I want to thank the governor, of course, for doing this for our state. I want to thank the governor and the legislature for your support of tourism and tourism marketing, so we can continue to provide these opportunities for residents and visitors and be such a big part of America 250. This is a good thing. We're a good country, and it is good and right for us to be vocal and unequivocal about American ideals, those that revere liberty and those that push the world towards freedom. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I was able to do a little quick research on the Supreme Court's birthright citizenship decision, and unfortunately it does appear that it was a complete loss in terms of, it was a 6-3 on the holding. 5 justices, Roberts, Barrett, Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson, held that anybody, you could have shown up on commercial flight, go to the hospital from China, have a baby, that's an American citizen, that the Constitution commands that. So would that mean, and I think Kavanaugh's concurrence is that maybe Congress could actually do it, you just can't do it through executive order. And then I think the 3 dissenting justices said that's not the proper interpretation of the 14th Amendment. So whether the president can do it or Congress, the Constitution doesn't mandate that anybody that shows up, it has to be afforded citizen just by birth, even if they're unlawfully present. But it doesn't appear, from what I saw, that there would be a way to legislate something different. And so that decision in birthright citizenship means, in effect, unless there's an amendment to the federal Constitution, that you will have birthright citizenship for birth tourists and people coming to the country illegally indefinitely. And so that's a tough one. I don't think that that's the original understanding of it. But what I think it does is, you've got to make sure that people on visas can't just come in and abuse it. You got to make sure the border remains secure. You got to remain all these different things to really get a handle on it. I know we've made a lot of progress with the border since President Trump took office, but I know there's people coming over from China and some of these other places. It's a massive cottage industry, and quite frankly, it's an abuse of American citizenship. So I'm definitely disappointed. Okay, do we got any questions back there?
Governor, obviously, this is not just what would you say to everyone about
Well, whatever we have, he had worse. We should put it in perspective. I mean, he got elected president of the United States, and half the country left when he got in because they were worried about what he would do as president, and that's not easy. And the fighting was brutal, and there was a lot of people that died in the course of the Civil War. But I think his view at the end of that, and what he said in his second inaugural, is with malice towards none and charity for all, you have to bind up the nation's wounds. And so if they could take that posture after that very bloody struggle, I think it kind of puts in perspective some of the things that we have in this country, that are divisive. We're allowing some of the stuff to be divisive. I think unnecessarily. Part of it's social media, part of it's this. I mean, honestly, some of the stuff you see on social media, guys, is not true. I mean, that's just the reality. I have people, Governor, is this true? And I'm like, now you tell me, do you think that's true. So, but that's just kind of the tit for tat. There's different people obviously can make money off the division. There's just a bunch of stuff. But I do think that there are real cleavages. I think there's a lot of real cleavages about the founding of this country and whether America 250 is something that's universally positive. I think in 1770 or in 1976, I wasn't born yet, but they had the 200th anniversary. And I think people, it seems like just looking at the historical record that it was really a great moment for the country. And so what I would just say is, you don't have to think everything was done perfectly, but you should acknowledge that these were folks who, they risked a lot to establish this country. They were well regarded, most of them were very wealthy, they were influential in the colonies, and they knew that if they took this step, failure would result in their death. No question, that's what would happen. And so it was the ultimate risk that was taken, and the risk was taken to say, you know, do we have rights from God, or are we just subjects to the king? Can we have a rule of law, or is it just whatever somebody across the pond happens to think on a whim? Can you actually govern yourself? Or should we just have various forms of despotism? That was the ultimate question they were looking to ask, and they risked it all to be able to give this country the chance to confound history and show that, yeah, actually people can govern themselves. And so those are questions we're still asking today. The 1776, 1787, 91, all these key times when we had these great documents, things were different then. They didn't have self-driving cars. They didn't have, rocket ships to outer space. They didn't have modern communications. But human nature was exactly the same then as it is now. The worry about concentrated power was the same then as it is now. All these things are perennial issues. They just apply in a different context. And they got more right than any other generation in human history have gotten right. So I think it's a time to celebrate and to be thankful. And I noticed some of the most, vicious critics of America and the founders, some of these people, like, they've chosen to come here from other countries and, denigrate. I think that you should study history and give them their due, as well as people like President Lincoln, who exemplified those values through very trying times. So what will happen is, if it, again, this was not my proposal, mine was bolder. So it was a truncated view, but so it'll be a big property tax cut. I'm for it. I think everyone should vote for it, and I think you guys will get relief. And honestly, these local governments are not going to starve. It'll still be way more money than they had, even 5 or 6 years ago. So don't buy that. So it's a little bit different than what I had done. But I know what will happen is that if and when it passes, and I assume it's going to pass, but I don't know. Mine would have passed because we really studied it. There will be a need to do an implementing bill in the post-November, pre-January timeframe, because there's things that are going to have to be ironed out. And so I'll be involved in that with the new legislative leaders. Part of the issue with the property tax was, I had to work with the Senate on it. I had a very hostile speaker who was trying to block everything we did. That's just a fact. And so I worked with them on it, and our goal was, unveil it, the Senate president endorsed it, and then have them send it, and basically the House would have to pass it. Well, the House, wouldn't pass it. And so they would only pass the scaled down version. So it just is what it is. I think it's still positive. But I think it was not quite the opportunity we had to where you could have owned your own home. As a homesteaded Florida resident, you would have had tax-free. Some would have had it on day one. Some it would have phased in over time, depending on how valuable your house is. But that would have been really significant. So, and we were ready to roll on all that. Now, on this one, if it passes, there'll be implementation on how you phase in the benefits. It says 250. You can get more than that. I believe that we have this massive surplus. We should put aside money and issue grants to local governments if they truly are in a pinch. I'm not going to give them a grant, to launch another DEI initiative. Like, no, we're not doing that. But if you tell me, this municipality, has 2 police officers that they're going to have to lay off because the revenue disruption, can you give us a grant for $300,000? I would do it. This thing, we want to keep things going, but to put in perspective, we reduced our budget 4 straight years in Florida. The amount we're spending, not even accounting inflation, is less than it was 4 years ago. Now, there's not a lot of places in the country that are doing it. Let's just be clear. But I raise it because if you go back to local government property tax revenue, we don't get any of it at the state level. It's all local. 2019, they got $32 billion. Today, they're getting $60 billion. So that's almost doubling the property tax revenue in a 7-year period. Some of these county budgets have more than doubled in periods of time. You have some, like in Broward, their school district has lost 50,000 students in the past 8 years, and yet their budget's gone from $2.5 billion to $5 billion. And it's like, what is going on? So a lot of what you're doing in property tax is going to, feed bureaucracy and do that. Now, I'm not saying all local governments are equal. I'm not saying Sumter and Marion are like Broward per se, but I am saying that we've shown you can do it by spending less. All these places can do it by spending less, and I have no question about that. So there will be an implementation period. I will be supportive of being very aggressive and making sure the tax relief is implemented as quickly as possible for people, but then I'm also going to be supportive of targeted grants to localities if they really are in a pinch, because each locality has a different tax base. We've got some places like Miami-Dade, they get massive money from visitors and rich foreigners who own these extravagant houses. And again, the property tax rollback is only for homesteaded Floridians. And so if you're a billionaire from Brazil, you're paying tax just like you always did. So they have massive amounts of revenue coming in from a variety of sources. We have others that are more bedroom communities that they've just historically relied on even homestead revenue more. Then that doesn't excuse them and say that their residents don't need relief, because they do. But what it may mean is, okay, this county, may need 30 million here. This city may need 5 million, whatever. I mean, we've got the biggest reserves and surplus in the history of the state. We have an ability to do that. So I'll be in support of both those things if it passes. What I would tell people is, you're going to hear probably that, no one's going to have any services, all this stuff. If this were done where you had it fully phased in on day one, you're still talking about they would have 20 billion more than they had in 2019 when they had 32 billion. I mean, it's still a massive increase in revenue from where we were 7 or 8 years ago. It's just not quite as big an increase. And oh, by the way, 32 billion in 2019, 60 billion now. If you do nothing on property tax, say you vote this down, by 2031, it's going to be 83 billion they're taking in property tax revenue. So that'll be almost tripling the revenue in just a 12 or 13 year period of time. That is, guys, that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. It's not fair to taxpayers. It's not sustainable, though. I mean, we've seen these blue states try to keep spending and do this, and eventually it doesn't work. So we're sitting here, we commission audits of both state agencies and these local governments. Blaise Ngolia, our CFO, used to be the state senator for the villages. He has been going around auditing, showing the increases in spending and all this stuff. And some people will be like, "Oh, what are you talking about the local governments, you manja?" Okay, yeah, we've reduced spending 4 years in a row. How do you like them apples? We're doing it. Yeah. We're not just talking, we're walking the walk. Anyone else? So what I would say to you is this: you are going to hear those horror stories from every local government in the state. They are going to. I know that, and they're doing that to try to get people to not vote for this. They have a self-interest in keeping the gravy train going. If you can't see that, I don't know how I can help you. You're going to continue to be inundated by this. They're going to tell you there's no money for infrastructure. You're not going to have any money for police. You're not going to have any money for any of these things. They are going to say that over and over again. And let me ask you this question. Excuse me, I'm answering your question. You asked a question, I'm answering it. If we had $32 billion in 2019, I came here, I was all over the state. Did we not have services in 2019? I mean, is this, do I have amnesia? I mean, yes, we did. So even if you just said 2019 levels, adjust for population and inflation, that'd be like 43 billion, 44 billion. You're having way more, even if you pass this property tax thing. So don't buy the hype that you're not going to be able to do these things. I can tell you, anytime the property tax is put to voters around the country, you hear the same arguments over and over again. And look, mine was a lot bolder. I mean, like, you know, part of me is like, you know, I'm voting for it, but part of me is like, you know, you watered it down, right? It's like, so if anything, your concern should be it should have been bolder, not that somehow this is going to be. So yes, they are going to say, oh, we can't give pay raise because property tax, we can't do this, we can't do that. You're going to be inundated with that. They're going to try to get every single person who is connected to local government to be hostile to doing things for taxpayers. But you know, one of the things is, you know, people that work in these agencies pay property tax too, and they are getting hit. And they would like to have a break as well. So that's going to be the hype. I think you're going to continue to see that going on. But this proposal the legislature did, you know, really at best, even when it's fully implemented, it will reduce your homesteaded property tax burden by about 2/3. And so, you know, if you're paying, you know, $10,000. You know, you're going to get 2/3 off that once it's fully phased in. People that have lower value homes are going to get that quicker. So it's good. It's good. But
volunteer BSO.
What's that?
Use a volunteer BSO.
Well, yeah. Look, I mean, honestly, all this stuff. This is what it's funny. In the 1970s, California had a big property tax revolt. Is anyone here from California, by the way? We do? Okay. So, yeah, so 1978, they did something called Prop 13. I know the history about it because it was run by a guy named Arthur Laffer, who's a friend of mine. And he did President Reagan's supply side tax cut, Laffer curve, all this other stuff. And so they basically did this major property tax rollback, capped it, all this other stuff. And they had, both parties were against it. The business roundtable was against it. The unions were against it. All the local governments were against it. The media was against it. And he's like, you know, all we had was just this one little group of people, the voters. And so they spent all this money saying you're not going to have services, you're not going to do that. And the voters voted it like 65, 67% and passed it. And guess what happened? You know, there were a couple years where the state had to help out, and then it boomed. And they did great. And honestly, like, they should have gone even further in hindsight. So this stuff all is there's nothing new under the sun. You're going to hear that. You're going to hear all this stuff. Like I said, I put aside in my proposal an actual fund to provide grants if there were a situation that was really significant. Even though I also believe that rolling back, you could still get the job done because you're still getting way more than what you got, you know, just 4 or 5 years ago. That's not even disputable. But I also figured, you know what? If voters know we're gonna have this, that's good. And so I'll still do it, even though it's not part of the amendment. We can still do it, and so we'll do that. But people say, oh, well, you have to backfill all the revenue. No. Giving a grant to help Essential is not the same as backfill. Backfill means if they're doing things like a DEI camp, I've got to backfill that. Why would I backfill that? I don't think that's appropriate spending. Of course I'm not going to backfill, but I will do grants for things that are important to people's communities. And look, when you get this money pouring in, like has happened over the past 6 or 7 years, there's always an incentive to spend. It's just the way it's human nature. It's not even that. I mean, look, people say, "Oh, is there corruption?" I don't even know. I'm sure there is somewhere, but that's not even the point. The point is how much is being spent over and above inflation and over and above population growth. We're spending less today than we did 4 years ago. We have fewer people working in the bureaucracy today than we did in 2019. So it can be done, and don't let anyone tell you it can't. But I absolutely think you're going to continue hearing that over and over again. And the question is just this, like, do you want relief or not? Do you think, because when you go to the grocery store and it's a lot more expensive, the reality is the state government doesn't control that. That's not anything you're going to be able to do by voting in November or electing somebody. It just is what. But at the state level, the one thing you can control is how much they can tax you. Do you want to protect your property from the tax collectors, or do you want them to keep using it as an ATM? And that's your choice. And you know what? God bless you, whichever way you choose. God bless you, my man. What's that? Oh, I one day at a time.
Be yourself if you do.
Anybody else?
Be yourself, right here.
Have a reaction to the Supreme Court decision today, the campaign spending in the state rights to transgender athletes?
Well, I think, as I understand it, the Supreme Court upheld the rights of states to ensure that girls' sports mean girls' sports. I obviously support that. Just for the record, we didn't need the Supreme Court to bail us out in Florida. We dealt with this issue like 6 years ago, and did that very quickly. I did not see the holding of the campaign finance. What did they rule? You know? Okay, that was not one that was high on my radar, so I don't necessarily want to comment. But look, on the sports stuff, people forget the frenzy of woke ideology that swept this country in 2020, 21, and 22. Every major corporation in the country was donating massive amounts of money to things like BLM. They were doing DEI. They were doing all this stuff. And really the only thing that stood in the way was Florida. We stood up against Disney when they were doing it in our state, and we won that fight, and that was a big fight. We were the first state to eliminate DEI from our public universities. We were the first state to eliminate ESG from our pension fund. We took $2 billion from BlackRock. No one had done that. So we really stood and stopped this, I think, in a way. But that women's sports thing, at the time when we did it, now it's like the public has kind of sided with the female athletes. At the time when we did it, we were attacked mercilessly for doing it, because we were cutting right against the ideology. But I have these girls, they're in high school, and they're running track, and they win a race, and then they go to the next round, and they've got 2 boys with the other 3 girls, and they lose to the 2 boys. And I'm just thinking to myself, how is that something that we should be proud of, that's fair, that's just, that's acceptable? To steal somebody else's glory like that and steal their hard work, I just thought it was disgraceful. So we stood up. When we did it, it was unpopular, certainly with media and with a lot of the activists, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. So when we said Florida was where woke goes to die, no state has done more to battle this nonsense successfully than we have in Florida, I can tell you that. Yes. So the question is what's the biggest challenge for the country, and then for Florida? Look, I think the biggest challenge for the country is getting our domestic house in order. We have almost $40 trillion in debt. I'd like to say that you can just keep charging things to the credit card indefinitely, and we're going to keep partying like it's 1999. I just don't think reality that that's going to be the case, and that's one of the reasons we've worked very hard to be fiscally responsible in Florida. I also think how we handle things like immigration, we have to stop letting people into the country that hate the country. It's not that difficult. And be politically correct about it. You just got to be honest that that's what we have to do. But we used to think that you'd come and you'd want to assimilate, and that's how it has been for a long time. And now I think that that's really, really changed. And so you've got to really get a handle on that. You also got to get a handle on the education, particularly higher education. Now, we've done a lot in Florida, and we're proud of that. But across the country, there's a lot of work to be done. You look at these New York City races where they're electing these Maoists to Congress or to the Democrat Party, and there's different currents, but one of the currents is you kind of have these people that are somewhat affluent that went to these hooty-tooty schools, and they're voting for this stuff. And it's almost like, okay, how did they get to have those views? And I think a lot of it has to do with the education system. So we've done a lot in Florida. We're the only state in the country where in our universities, all tenured professors must undergo review every 5 years and can be terminated for poor performance. And so we've used that very significantly across the state. We also created hiring so that you can hire professors directly and that the current faculty can't blackball them for ideology. So we brought in a lot of conservative scholars to like the Hamilton School at University of Florida, New College, Adam Smith Center at Florida International University. Amazing, unbelievable. So we're really leaning in on it and working, but I'll tell you, it is a problem that's been decades in the making, and it's not going to be something that's done overnight. Linda McMahon has done some good stuff at the federal level to push back on some of the universities, and I know they have more work to do, but I think the progress has been positive. So there's just a whole bunch of things that go, but it's like what frustrates me about is if we just didn't shoot ourselves in the foot as a country on some of this stuff. Like, yeah, there's problems that you can't control. Some of these problems have been created by us over many decades. And it's like, just stop doing that. And if we do that, then I think we're going to be good. So I know there's been a lot of good work being done in the last year or two, but we need a lot more to be able to ensure. Are we going to be able to be here 250 years from now and be able to put up a statue of somebody who did some great things, maybe 50 years from now, and say, we made it to 500 years as a country because we had all these patriots that were fighting for the right things and understood all the great principles or not. And I think 250 is a lot for a republic. They typically don't make it to 500 years, and so the question is, are we going to heed Franklin's admonition and keep the republic? And we got a lot of work to do. Thanks, everybody. Happy 4th of July. Happy America 250.